we are gonna have some fun with audio right here, right now. You know what I'm noticing about the technology revolution, the media technology revolution, is it seems to benefit conservatives. The instant access to information and historical audio, when put together properly, and I don't mean edited to make my point of view seem more palatable. I mean when you actually look back on history, and it's not a debate in a classroom, it's not an academic revision, when you start to put history together in the actual words of people who made history, the conservative argument is made time and time again, leaving little doubt who's right and who's wrong in these debates. The fight that we're seeing now, and I got to say, Eric Cantor's becoming a hero. Eric Cantor seems to be the guy who is holding the line for conservatives in these debt talks. Because you've got Mitch McConnell, and I'm going to say this on the air. Mitch McConnell did not want Rand Paul to be a senator. He chose a guy named Trey Grayson, and that was his chosen guy. That was going to be his acolyte. And the conservative voters in Kentucky said, no way, no how, we want Rand Paul. And after watching this little McConnell game, this establishment inside game that McConnell's playing, I think Rand Paul would be right to run a primary candidate against Mitch McConnell. This idea that we need our leadership in the Senate, and I don't mean to be leaders in the Senate or in the House of Representatives or to occupy committee chairmanships. I mean that we need individuals like Mitch McConnell's absolute nonsense. I'm not saying Mitch McConnell's a bad guy. I don't know Mitch McConnell. Never sat in a room with him. I don't know him as a human being. But it seems that he has become, for lack of a better word, an animal of the Senate. He is a function, he is a part of that fraternity. When we talk about senators acting like a fraternity, he is one of those senators. And this little scheme he's cooked up to give 3 little debt ceiling raises and offer more authority to the president to save the GOP brand is nonsense. Who is he saving it from? How are you saving the Republican brand by giving more authority to the president in the debt negotiations, to offer him more authority that the Constitution does not provide him? How are you saving the brand? You're not saving the brand. You're destroying the brand. You are essentially saying that we Republicans need to be slightly less crappy than the Democrats to make people less nervous. I understand that dealing with a nervous public is very difficult. But that's when you hear the phrase adult in the room, that's what that means. And Eric Cantor seems to be the adult in the room on this one. Boehner kind of wants to go along to get along. McConnell kind of wants to go along to get along. They're offering some cuts here. They're offering some cuts there. But the president seems to be dictating what they can and cannot cut. And that is not something that the president ought to be given the authority to decide. All bills for raising revenue begin in the House of Representatives. The Congress has the sole power of tax law and of spending and borrowing. The president can merely veto their initiatives, their pieces of legislation. The fact that the president is saying, don't push me, enough's enough, don't call my bluff, so what? It's only portions of the public that believe the president to be supreme, to almost be a monarch with a House of Commons, that believe the president really is in the catbird seat here. He's not holding the cards. Republicans in the House of Representatives are holding the cards. And if John Boehner doesn't understand that, then maybe John Boehner ought not to be Speaker of the House. And again, I don't know John Boehner. He might be a really swell guy. Seems like, well, in that whole thing of a guy you might want to have a beer with, I might want to have a beer with John Boehner. But give me a guy like Tom DeLay, a hammer, any day of the week. Give me somebody who's going to throw down the hammer and say, this is it. And already Steny Hoyer, we're going to get into that article, Steny Hoyer has already said, Democrats, no way, no how on the balanced budget amendment. They want to be able to spend money with a 51% majority, and that's it. The idea that you might need 2/3 to increase federal debt, to impose more taxation on taxpayers. I don't say the American people. I'm sick and tired of people, even conservatives, who say the American people. Say the American person. Talk about the individual. Speak to their lives as taxpayers, as family members, as business owners, as employees, as people who have to live in this economy that they're trying to destroy for us for whatever reason. I am not going to say, whoa, Mitch McConnell, he's being the adult in the room. No, he's worried about the media. He's worried about whether or not his friends in the Senate are going to invite him to play golf. I'm sorry. This is unacceptable. And what's even better, you know what I'm enjoying? I'm enjoying the fact that Democrats and the so-called neutral observers at ABC, I don't need to go through the alphabet soup of the networks. This is anger. The conservatives are all up in arms. The talk radio hosts. Well, maybe it's the guys like myself and Church and Levin and Hannity and Beck and Cam and Company who are the only ones that get it. Maybe it's because we cherish history as it is, not as it can be revised. I'm going to go back to FDR again, and then I'm going to play you something that's going to blow your minds. A telephone conversation between Lyndon Baines Johnson and the newly elected Ted Kennedy on how to message Medicare. Back when we had this thing called conservative Democrats, LBJ and Ted Kennedy worried that if Republicans and conservative Democrats were actually told the future costs of Medicare, they never would have supported it. Kind of like when Chuck Schumer said, extreme cuts. The caucus is telling us to use the word extreme, right on up to private jets, yachts, oil companies, millionaires, billionaires. I've been reading to you from Bastiat and Marx a lot lately to show you that all of these fights have been going on for longer than anyone's been alive. There is nobody roaming this earth right now that was there when Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto and Bastiat wrote the law. There's nobody here. You're going to be very hard-pressed to find somebody that remembers as a voter FDR's fireside chats. We're probably almost to the point now we're running out of Truman voters. 1-866-95-PATRIOT. The fact of the matter is, the government does have the money to pay out its obligations to the military, to senior citizens. They do. They have it coming in every month. The Treasury does have the money to pay those obligations. What they don't have the money for is, now I'm gonna show you something again, coming up in a little bit. China is running a $193 billion surplus for this quarter. Do you know who's paying for the fight against AIDS in China? The United States. The Chinese are running massive surpluses in cash and in trade. And instead of spending the Chinese are building high-speed rail. Yeah, because they're not taking care of their people. So we, the moron American taxpayers, are sending money to the government so they can fund the UN AIDS initiative, the global AIDS, I'll get into that in just a second, which is spending lavishly on the population of China. 1-866-95-PATRIOT. Do you have the FDR audio from yesterday? Do you have that? Play that one.
This Social Security measure gives at least some protection to 30 million of our citizens who will reap direct benefits through unemployment compensation, through old age pensions, and through increased services for the protection of children and the prevention of ill health. We can never insure 100% of the population against 100% of the hazards and vicissitudes of life, but we have tried to frame a law which will give some measure of protection to the average citizen and to his family against the loss of a job and against poverty-stricken old age. It seems to me that if the Senate and the House of Representatives in this long and arduous session had done nothing more than pass this security bill, Social Security Act, the session would be regarded as historic for all time.
At no point did Franklin Delano Roosevelt make any statement other than this was a guarantee for Americans. It was, you want to talk about the 14th Amendment and not questioning the debt. This was a guarantee made to voters by FDR, and the Social Security Act passed for Barack Obama to pretend that they don't have the money to spend on Social Security, which was given to them, confiscated from taxpayers for the purpose of funding part of their retirement. And as FDR said, couldn't protect 100% of the population against 100% of the vicissitudes of life. But he never said if the government found it inconvenient to pay for those things, it could just claim it doesn't have the money. But it certainly has the money to take care of Chinese citizens who are suffering ill health from AIDS. Now, I want to go right on up from the New Deal to the Great Society. This is a newly released conversation between Lyndon Baines Johnson and Ted Kennedy.
My health program yesterday runs $300 million, but the fools had to go to projecting it down the road 5 or 6 years. And when you project it the first year, it runs $900 million. But the first thing Dick Russell comes running in and say, my God, you've got $1 billion program for next year on health, therefore I'm against any of it now. Do you follow me?
Right.
Now, we don't want to stir up any more hornets than we have to.
You hear that? Those damn fools had to go ahead and tell the truth about what this would cost 5, 6 years down the road. That tape is about 50 years old. Did you hear that? You want me to play it again? I want to play it again for you. I want you to listen to this very carefully. I want you to hear Ted Kennedy in the background.
My health program yesterday runs $300 million, but the fools had to go to projecting it down the road 5 or 6 years. And when you project it the first year, it runs $900 million. But the first thing Dick Russell comes running in and say, my God, you've got $1 billion program for next year on health, therefore I'm against any of it now. Do you follow me?
Right.
Now, we don't want to stir up any more hornets than we have to.
So he was worried that Senator Dick Russell of Georgia and conservative Democrats looking at the balloon of this would nearly bankrupt the United States in the future. They were good. This is Democrats too. We're saying we can't afford this. LBJ is telling you can take it. Right. Yeah, don't tell anybody about the real costs of this. Now, some of you liberals are sick and tired of conservatives looking lovingly back at Ronald Reagan. Do you want to hear what Ronald Reagan had to say about this program? Play it.
One of the traditional methods of imposing statism or socialism on a people has been by way of medicine. It's very easy to disguise a medical program as a humanitarian project. Most people are a little reluctant to oppose anything that suggests medical care for people who possibly can't afford it. James Madison, in 1788, speaking to the Virginia Convention, said, "Since the general civilization of mankind, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachment of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations." Now, in our country, under our free enterprise system, we have seen medicine reach the greatest heights that it has in any country in the world. Today, the relationship between patient and doctor in this country is something to be envied any place. The privacy, the care that is given to a person, the right to choose a doctor, the right to go from one doctor to the other. But let's also look from the other side at the freedom the doctor loses. A doctor would be reluctant to say this. Well, like you, I'm only a patient, so I can say it in his behalf. The doctor begins to lose freedoms. It's like telling a lie, and one leads to another. First, you decide that the doctor can have so many patients. They're equally divided among the various doctors by the government. But then the doctors aren't equally divided geographically. So a doctor decides he wants to practice in one town, and the government has to say to him, you can't live in that town. They already have enough doctors. You have to go someplace else. And from here, it's only a short step to dictating where he will go. This is a freedom that I wonder whether any of us have the right to take from any human being. Take it into your own occupation or that of your husband. All of us can see what happens once you establish the precedent that the government can determine a man's working place and his working methods, determine his employment.
Under the guise of socialism, Americans will reject it every time. But under the guise of liberalism, they will take it every time, Reagan said. That coming from Norman Thomas, the Socialist Party candidate for the presidency of the United States, 3-time candidate. Everything you see, going back to Lenin, going back to Alinsky, going back to Thomas, going back to Wilson, if you actually admit what it is that you're trying to do, the people will reject you. You have to drop the actual language and code it in a moral argument. Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. They knew in the 1960s. LBJ knew it, and he was angry. Can you imagine if this were today? This high-speed technological time that we live in? If that call got out today, you would have known about it instantly. It took 50 years for you to hear that. Reagan's recording is also 50 years old. If the American voter heard that in an election cycle in the 1960s, LBJ would have been run out of office. But it was easy. If Cronkite didn't say it, it didn't get out. If it wasn't on the CBS Evening News, you didn't get to hear it. There was no alternative. There was no YouTube. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. There was no Sirius XM. There was no conservative-minded talk radio at that time. Why? The Fairness Doctrine. 1-866-95-PATRIOTS. And now you know. LBJ knew these programs were a balloon back then. And Kennedy knew it too. And I'm willing to bet any amount of money that FDR knew it as well. We're right, and they are wrong. That's the end of the story. WilkowMajority.com, Sirius XM Patriot. I have 2 articles from Reuters here in front of me. They're all up on the website. They'll all go out in the content newsletter. Headline, Cutting AIDS Funding to China, a Big Mistake, UN AIDS. It would be a big mistake for donors to cut funding to China in the fight against AIDS. The head of UN AIDS said Monday, rebuffing critics who say the world's second largest economy should no longer be a recipient of such aid. Several non-government organizations involved in fighting AIDS in China say they are facing more difficulties from receiving donations from developed nations because of the country's wealth. I think it would be a big mistake for donor, and particularly for anyone who's invested in China today, to withdraw for the simple reason that this funding is a catalytic fund, said Michael Sidibe, executive director of the Joint United Nations Project on HIV and AIDS, to Reuters. The Global Fund has approved funding of $940 million to China, of which $369 million goes to fighting AIDS. Who is the largest contributor to the United Nations? The United States. Here's a quote from Rand Paul in ABC News. If we cross the August 2nd It's not financial Armageddon as they're trying to make it out to be. It's not an either-or situation. We bring in $200 billion in revenue every month. Our interest payment is about $20 billion. We have plenty of revenue to pay our interest every month. If the president, if he were responsible, would stand up and say, I will not default on the debt. Well, who holds the lion's share of our debt? China. Why are we sending money to the United Nations so they can send it to China to fight AIDS when they're sitting on a $193 billion surplus from this quarter alone? China has enough money to pay for its own problems, and they're holding our debt in the process. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever why the United States has to contribute to anything to benefit the Chinese people when the Chinese government has enough money of its own to spend on its own problems. We owe money to China. Instead of giving it to them to spend on their people, we should be paying them our debt. So we're looking at increasing the debt to China. We're going to borrow money from China to give it back to them to treat their people. That is pure insanity. Headline from Reuters. China first half fiscal surplus at $193 billion. I said quarter, excuse me. China posted a fiscal surplus of 1.25 trillion yuan, or $193.3 billion in the first half of the year as steady economic growth and rising prices lifted government revenues, the Ministry of Finance said Thursday. Follow this train of thought. We are borrowing money from the Chinese government that we don't have. We're giving money that we don't have, that we borrowed from the Chinese government, to the United Nations, for the United Nations to turn back around and give it to the Chinese Ministry of Health to treat people with AIDS. Does anybody see the pure insanity in this? Oh, gee, it might cause a diplomatic rift, right? I mean, gee, if we actually turned around and said to China, you guys are sitting on a $193 billion surplus. There is no reason why the United Nations has to give American taxpayer money to China to treat Chinese people when they have plenty of money to treat their own people. You want to know why they can build high-speed rail? That's why they can build high-speed rail. You want to know why they can invest in education? That's why they can invest in education. You want to know why the Chinese economy is growing? Because we are giving them money. It's not just borrowing money. It's not just the trade deficit. It's not just partnerships with GM where they're reverse engineering our technology. We are literally borrowing money from them to give it to them to treat their own people with interest. 1-866-95-PATRIOT. This has been going on now for generations. We're borrowing money from countries to give it to them to heal their people. Remember all that talk about, wow, we're building roads and schools in Iraq and Afghanistan while our schools are crumbling here. FDR used to talk about rebuilding America. Obama's talking. What you would think, this talk of rebuilding America going back to World War II, you'd think Hiroshima and Nagasaki were in the United States. You would think that Dresden was in the United States. You would think that London was in the United States. You would think the Atlantic Wall was on this side of the Atlantic, the way these people talk. I'm going to go back through it. I pulled my file. Between George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, through the Clinton years, we spent $664 billion on infrastructure for the purpose of creating jobs. Are you telling me that a 20-year-old bridge or a 20-year-old road or a 20-year-old airport or a 20-year-old port needs to be quote-unquote rebuilt? And where the hell are all those jobs? By the way, Ben Bernanke doesn't think gold is money. Dollar down again, gold at record prices again today. Bernanke said yesterday that he didn't think gold was money. Gold spiked to a record high this morning. It is pushing $1,600 an ounce. You want me to play that again? Here's Ron Paul asking a question of Ben Bernanke at the House Finance Committee hearing the other day.
Do you think gold is money?
No.
It's not money. Even if it had been money for 6,000 years, somebody reversed that and eliminated that economic law.
Well, it's an asset. I mean, it's the same. Would you say Treasury bills are money? I don't think they're money either, but they're a financial asset.
Why do central banks hold it?
Well, it's a form of reserves.
Why don't they hold diamonds?
Well, it's tradition, long-term tradition.
Well, some people still think it's money. I yield back. My time is up.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know that crazy, wacky country, China, that we borrow money from and then give it back to them so they could take care of their AIDS patients? You know what they're stocking up on? Gold. It's just a matter of tradition, right? You know what India's stocking up on? Gold. It's a matter of tradition. You know what Russia is stocking up on? Gold. You know what we're doing? We're printing money. You know what Brazil's doing? Drilling for oil. You know what Venezuela's doing? Drilling for oil. You know what Argentina is doing? Drilling for oil. You know what your beloved Sweden is doing? Drilling for oil. You know what the Canadians are doing? Drilling for oil. You know what we're doing? Printing money. Monetizing the debt. And there's Mitch McConnell. Look at me. I got a great idea. Let me give some more authority to the president on this one. I'm sorry. It's about time Rand Paul turns around and says, thanks for the advice and helping me find my way around the Senate. Now I got to run a primary against you. Maybe it's time for John Boehner to take the sobbing and the crying to the dinner theater and let Eric Cantor be the Speaker of the House. Or Paul Ryan. I could care less which one.